you very much for the kind invitation. Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and I want to admit to you that it's the Tamils in Durban who pushed me to join you. I'm retired now, so I started unpacking. It takes 2 years to unpack boxes, as you know. And I found there a card that was sent to me from London. I don't know whether you did or one of you did. And it said to me, this is, I think, the day after I was elected. I hope that you will help the Tamils in Sri Lanka. And I'd forgotten about that card. And I thought, my God, somebody had a vision. Send me this card, because I never taught Tamil, I have to tell you. Because I'm trained as a lawyer and a judge. I'm a practitioner. I've sat with academics. I love academics. I love your research and everything, but do they tell us what to do? No, they just tell you the challenges and how bad things are. So I'm encouraging academics to tell us what we can do next. This is very important, and the vision you have for the Ilankai Tamil Sangam in America and of course in the UK. Come to the end of the road, there's nothing further we can do. You know, this government is not delivering on its promise of a comprehensive address to the situation post-conflict. But none of us will say we've reached the end of the road. I am not an apologist for the UN. I only work there. When you think United Nations, remember it's governments. Those who make the decisions are governments and member states. They have their national interests, they have their regional interests, their regional groups, and they have the interests of their friends. You know, you often hear of this very special relationship between the US and Israel, and therefore they wouldn't even vote on an issue that is fact-based, such as the settlements. So I have often said, you have to hold your friends to the same standards that you hold your foes to. So this is the politics inside the UN. And so I'm sure you understand why Sri Lanka was never addressed or put on the agenda of the big forums in the UN, the Security Council and the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. So that's no accident. It is a political positioning, and therefore you have to see your struggle. You are quite correctly have taken the human rights route to break the obstacles we placed. Very correct. I did the same because I had the power to do so as High Commissioner. But nevertheless, it is a political struggle. So when you think about United Nations, you have to see what you are up against there. So let me briefly say that the United Nations, as you know, started off as a body of governments, of sovereign states, each one asserting their sovereignty. And this is what Sri Lanka has used again and again. This is what many states use when we criticize them for human rights violations. That's an internal issue, don't touch it. It was so surprising when one of the special rapporteurs just looked around in Switzerland. Like we say, he looked at the backyard in Switzerland, where the discussion has always been on violations in developing countries elsewhere. And he found that the treatment of migrants, people of color, was terrible, poor people in Switzerland. And of course, not a good reaction from the good government of Switzerland. And this is the reaction of governments everywhere, including Sri Lanka, who said this is an internal matter, do not interfere in the internal matters. So that first resolution at the Human Rights Council was not carried, as you know, because the Sri Lankan ambassador heard that the European states were talking about this, and so he had all these counter tactics, and they actually got a resolution complimenting Sri Lanka for ending terrorism. And I was very new and saw that. How did that happen? a good initiative was hijacked by a government that is supposed to explain to the world why it killed so many people. And so I went to the European states and said, you have to have cross-regional sponsorship for everything. It mustn't just come from Europe. It mustn't just come from Africa or the Middle East countries. And a good practice developed thereafter. The sponsoring states must come from the various regions, so it's not seen as Eurocentric or the West against Sri Lanka. And this is how they won the first round, the Sri Lankan government, the Rajapaksa government at that time. It never reached the agenda of the Security Council, and I've been asking why. We saw the shelling of innocent people, and war crimes are a concern of the Security Council. Peace, development, and human rights are their concern. I was telling some friends whom I met last night how the Security Council members did not allow the High Commissioner for Human Rights to address the Security Council, because some of them felt human rights is a matter to be dealt in Geneva, don't bring it to New York. So that's another attitude you're facing here. By the time I finished, I had addressed the Security Council 15 or 16 times. And even though Palestine was not on the agenda for that day, Sri Lanka was not on the agenda at all, I brought it in by giving comparative descriptions of violations that are ongoing. So, as you all know, there is talk now of reform of the Security Council. I invite you to join in that. Reform. You see, we want the next step. We don't want to just hear that they don't have any enforcement mechanism, that they take up political positions in support of their friends. The 5 who hold the veto are using that veto indiscriminately. I pointed out to the Security Council, you use the veto, United States and UK, to stop sanctions against apartheid South Africa. So with your veto, you supported racism. The United Nations is against racism, so you went against your own charter. The suggestion then is to start a movement to get the P5 to accept that they will not use the veto when the matter before them are serious human rights violations. So I started off by saying to you, the United Nations is a club of governments, but the charter says we the people. So we have to put the people back in there. That's yet another campaign that is going on, to put the people back into the United Nations. So international human rights law and international humanitarian law offers us the scope to try and get governments more accountable. And steadily they have. They have signed up to various conventions, civil and political rights, economic, social and cultural rights, conventions on the child, women, torture. So even though they are sovereign, they realize that their global interest is also the national interest. But the national interest is also global. So they want to be part of the international community, and therefore they've undertaken obligations internationally. And this is where human rights activists come. I used to say, but you made the law. You drafted all these conventions. You've taken on all these undertakings. So why aren't you complying with them? And then we will boldly say, and I'm very pleased that my successor, Zayed, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, has also made a very strong statement to say that the most serious violators of human rights are governments themselves. So you see what a strong statement that is. And it's only this office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that can say that, because of the mandate that was given to the High Commissioner by the General Assembly, which is address all human rights of all people all over the world. The Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, told me that I can go all the way. He stretched his arms out and said, you can go all the way. And he said he can't. He's constrained because his is a political office. So how did it come about that there is such an office, such a meaningful office as the High Commissioner for Human Rights, described as a voice for the voiceless? Well, it doesn't mean that all these governments got together one day and decided, we think we should be more accountable, let's set up this office. It came about because of the tremendous push from civil society. So the Vienna Conference on Human Rights, 1993, we didn't have our first election, that was 94, but President Mandela was out, we had advanced in our constitutional negotiations. And so President Mandela encouraged NGOs to attend this World Conference. South Africa, as you know, was out of the United Nations, suspended, and we were not participating in any UN activities. So while you are so familiar with international organizations' actions and we knew nothing, and I knew nothing when I went as a lowly NGO representing women's organization to Vienna. And then I saw how separate everything was. There's a separate conference for civil society, and the important conference was among governments. And yet the powerful voice of civil society reached them there. It was the NGOs who attended the Vienna conference who insisted that the UN must set up an office of High Commission for Human Rights. And that's why in 94 the GA adopted this. And as you know, this office has come a long way by focusing on issues that had been hidden from view, such as economic and social rights, such as violations even in developed countries, poverty in developed countries, such as the LGBTI rights, and of course, most importantly, victims who are caught in the crossfire and have no access to justice and reparation. These are the forgotten issues that at least this office helps. I have said, and my successor agrees with me, no High Commissioner can do that work of promotion and protection of human rights all over the world without the help and close cooperation with civil society organizations. Almost 2,000, very actively. You'll be amazed how NGOs at great risk send the information out to the High Commissioner for Human Rights so that the High Commissioner prepares the human rights report of every country in the world. Governments are very surprised how that information came up. Even our reports, the reports of the Office on Israel's occupation of Palestine, most of the information comes from inside that country. So it's not, of course it's also international organizations and their research, which is very important. But if it comes from the people inside the country, then you have buy-in. So I think that we should do much more work looking at the structures, join in this campaign for reform and change. 17 years they did things in the old traditional way. And yesterday too, I'm not an insider, I'm a judge. I'm used to saying one thing once, and then everybody follows it. I learned as an advocate, you have to say the same thing over and over and over again. And mainly is to remind states of their obligations. You've signed this, and this is what the president said at the summit when all the heads of states accepted the new declaration on development, because that's a huge struggle on our part to push the human rights language in. But all the heads of states adopted it. So it's very useful to remind the head of state, this is what you said outside there. Now, in most cases, that information is not accessible to people within countries, unless they have access to computers and so on. And so you are the source for them, to keep track on what is being said by their governments in international fora. I have started to do this. I've addressed many universities in South Africa. The last one was University of Western Cape, where I had a long list of positions that South Africa has adopted outside, which go against our constitution, and which is the same language as the apartheid government used. And the last conversation I had in the Western Cape, the dean of the law school said everybody is stunned, speechless, because they didn't know that this is what the government was doing outside the country. So you really have access to this, provide the information, provide the tools for people inside the country to articulate what it is they want. Otherwise, you're going to get complacency in this situation where the government thinks, well, it's not, the people don't want international tribunal or justice mechanisms and so on. So let's use the special rapporteurs that I think 5 have already been into Sri Lanka already, which is very good. They are, let me see, the working group on enforced and involuntary disappearance made a full country visit in November 2015. Now that's an intergovernmental group, remember. The special rapporteur on truth, justice, reparations and guarantees of non-recurrence has continued to remain in very close contact. And Sri Lanka has now signed the Convention on Disappearances, which means complaints can be taken straight to the international body on disappearances. Why I mentioned special rapporteurs on torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and the special rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers have made joint visits. Why is it important? Because their reports are read in the international fora, either in the Human Rights Council, and hopefully sometimes it can be pushed before the General Assembly if these are GA mandated special rapporteurs. But the other reason why it's important is they make recommendations. So we want the recommendations, we want the strategies and what to do next. So do look at those. And do look at how we can help reform so we could get issues before the General Assembly. I regard myself as a practitioner, so to me it's no surprise to mention all the cases. And people often ask, well, how come it went on for so long and nobody thought of bringing an action for the rights of prisoners on Robben Island? And this is what benefited Mandela and all of them. And I was a very young lawyer, I think I was under 30. I was visiting Robben Island, seeing my own clients, and we're not supposed to talk about prison conditions. We're supposed to talk about the case alone. It was within sight, within hearing. So you can imagine how much information I did pick up on the conditions. You know, this is what they wanted to talk about. They didn't know what their rights are. And when they broke a prison regulation, they were sentenced to 6 months sentence. And ANC people who were there said that dogs had been let loose upon them, and they were bitten and so on. And none of that came out. It was also secret. So I had this opportunity to speak to my clients only about the case. And so I don't want to tell you the strategy that we adopted. I could have been struck off the road, but I brought the application and we won it with costs. It spells out that prisoners are not property. They have rights. They have a right to a lawyer. So it's this long practice of looking for those cracks and pushing that agenda more and more. This is what we need to do for Sri Lanka. It's not the end of the road because there is an opening here. The matter is before the Human Rights Council. The High Commission of Human Rights has been asked to update the Council twice a year on how the implementation process is going. And it's true, Heather is right. They haven't been doing so well. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that they have done something. Firstly, they consented to the resolutions. Secondly, they did promise a comprehensive delivery. They haven't done that. They're setting up some institutions, but not with the kind of transparency and public consultation that should go on. Now, we've heard some of the challenges. I want to add to that my deep concern about the continuing detentions of people. Let me give you some of the figures. There are security detainees still held under the PTA, and that's a major concern for the Tamil community. In December 2015, the government released on bail 39 individuals, who of course were detained without charge, but around 250 detainees are believed to remain in detention. The government has made indictments in 117 of these cases, and in January created a special High Court bench to expedite proceedings. And the government promised the Attorney General's office would make decisions on the other detainees, but no further charges have been made. My time's up. I think you've given me the least time. You brought me the longest way. So that concerns me, and actually the High Commissioner reports it's very similar to the white van abductions. So it's very, very chilling, very immediate. I just want to urge you, there are many things that all of us can do, and particularly the Tamil diaspora in the rest of the world. You've already done it. That Human Rights Council resolution and the push there didn't happen, just happened. It happened because of the efforts of Sri Lankan people outside the country. I really salute you for that and say, just keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't actually pushing because there is a question and answer session, so people are waiting to ask a lot of questions from you. So there you can expand more on these issues. So quickly, before going into question and answer session, we were originally planning to have 20 minutes, but the time's running out. But also, I'll welcome if there's any quick remarks about the other panelists. But again, in the interest of the time, I'm just going to quickly go through. Nimi actually spoke about the gender is being used as used to depoliticize the accountability issues, and she have actually drawn parallels with other areas. So that was her topic she was actually going through on. Whereas Kate talked about the processes and the lack of political will and how we can actually push that. Heather was part of the monitoring panel, which is MAP, which I forgot to actually mention. So she have actually shared her experience from that. And obviously, lastly, said, Honorable Navanitha Pillai has said that UN is a political body. You have chosen the right route to go there, like through the human rights, but then you need to have a political mind to handle that. I think that kind of summarizes most of the thing. And also she said that any kind of reaction should come from inside, or kind of like, the people to bring out these issues from Sri Lanka, if that's possible. So before I actually go into question and comments, I just have to bring one more person who actually participate in this process. This is Dasha Jagadishwaran. She's actually part of a Tamil policy think tank called Adayalam. And she have completed her studies in Canada, and she's a lawyer by profession, and she's actually working on the ground with that policy think tank. So I would like a quick kind of a summary in 2 to 3 minutes, if she can actually give the update from the ground.
Hi, so I was informed of this like 10 minutes ago, so please forgive me if this is not put together well. So I'm gonna be talking at length at the Pearl session later this afternoon, so I encourage you all to attend that, which is happening at 4 p.m. But just to give you an idea of what I'm doing, the Adayalam Center for Policy Research was started a few months ago by Guru Paran, Father Leel Rajendra, myself, and Gajan Mahendra. So I'm the only one who's from the diaspora working at the center, but the idea is to build institutional capacity to do policy work and sort of human rights, constitutional and transitional justice work from the Northeast, and to break the chain of relying on Colombo to do some of the intellectual heavy lifting. The other thing that the think tank is focused on is inter and intra-community issues, because we feel like given the fact that the four of us have credentials within the Tamil community and within the Tamil nationalist community, we're best positioned to have conversations about things like Tamil-Muslim relations, caste issues, and gender inequality. So we're hoping to work on those issues as well. I've only been in Jaffna for 3 months, so my exposure to the ground so far has been limited, but in my time there, some of the things I've seen and that I will discuss at length later this afternoon are mostly in relation to militarization as well as land acquisitions. So I think, as the panelists mentioned, and I think Kate, you said this, security sector reform really needs to be pushed right now, and I think when we talk about transitional justice or even the Constitution, while you have such a heavy military presence in the Northeast, it makes a lot of the environment unconducive or non-conducive towards acting on any of these things. I think it's really hard to break some of the cycles of violence that Nimi spoke about as well when you have such a heavy military presence in the Northeast. And I think there's a role for the diaspora to play in this beyond just advocacy, but I think it's also about linking what we've been doing so far in terms of political and human rights advocacy alongside economic development now, and I think that linkage is possible. So when we talk about things, I'll just give one quick example, but there's something called the Civil Security Department that operates largely in the Vanni, and it's sort of seen as the do-gooder wing of the military, at least that's how the government promotes it. And what it does is it runs all of these civilian activities. So it actually runs preschools, it runs livelihood programs, it works with a lot of the former cadres in the Vanni, but what it really is, I think, is counterinsurgency. And so we have to be aware of the fact that because there aren't many alternatives in terms of livelihood opportunities that go beyond just providing people with cows and goats or sewing machines, when they start looking for actual jobs, right now in the Vanni, the largest provider of those jobs is the military through the CSD. So I think when we talk about the diaspora's role, there is that link that can be made between, well, we want the military out of the Northeast, we want proper demobilization and demilitarization. So in addition to advocacy, I think there's something to be done in terms of the economic situation in the Vanni and in other parts of Sri Lanka. So I'll talk more about that and some of the other things I've seen later this afternoon. And thank you so much to the panelists for everything you've said so far. It's been really enlightening and giving me the opportunity. Thanks.
I'm going to make a unilateral decision here because we have 20 minutes, but I had to cut down to 10 minutes of questions here because I want to give more time, question and answer session with the former High Commissioner later. So if we can actually start with your comment, you have a remark, and then we can more.
I do think for this audience it's really important to take seriously something that Dr. Pillay brought up and that Ms. Ryan referenced. I want to be clear here that I think Kate and myself and a number of others are engaging in the work that we do now out of a failure to see action. Not out of a desire to not be active, but to not see action. This is a critique, for me, that's born out of a deep engagement with the international community. A critique that came out of being the head of the Sri Lankan Working Group in 2009 and being with all of the NGOs who refused to take action in Sri Lanka, who refused to challenge the Sri Lankan government, would only put their name on a letter that was going to the special representative. That is not action to me, but I was in those meetings as a senior analyst for the International Crisis Group, having to interview 200 women around the world, Tamil women, to get the stories of rape, to re-traumatize them, to put that into a crisis group report, and eventually ended up going to Hillary Clinton's #1 intern. Now, this is the type of action we're told that we have to expect, that the work that we're supposed to be doing a PhD through being an aid worker, that is active, that is on the ground, that is engaged. To me, now being the senior advisor for the United Nations Women on Political Rights, I have looked at the way that governments across the Asia Pacific are looking at women. I have seen the way the Sri Lankan government has very usefully used the UN standards and indicators on women's progress to put forward, just 2 weeks ago, the number of Tamil women in management positions. And that has now become an indicator to understand Tamil women's political voice, because it shows leadership, right? Obviously, those are two completely different arenas, right? So to me, this critique, the one that we are leveling, it comes out of a deep engagement, and it's more useful. It is more useful than things like what Ms. Ryan suggests, that, you know, when I spoke at Congress, you get this argument over and over again on Sri Lanka. Things are good, but there's problems. It's good that you did this, but there's another issue. This is why tribunals take 30 years, because we exist in this space of yeah, it's going well, except there's 1 or 2 problems, but we're still in a moment where 2 Tamil students were shot, just for being Tamil. There's resistance happening on the island, so I think I would caution this idea that, yes, the history of structures in Sri Lanka are not able to deal with questions of accountability, but we certainly do have the expertise. The idea of outside objectivity is very problematic. I think we have to interrogate that. Every objectivity comes with an agenda, a feminist agenda, UN agenda, as Dr. Pillai points out, the UN has a political agenda. So in this crowd in particular, I don't want to put the idea out there that Tamil people, Tamil expertise, Tamil women should not be at the forefront of this, that we need an outside intervention. The expertise exists, the space has to be created for that.
Thank you, I fully agree. Thank you. So let's move on to questions. So 10 minutes. If you could actually introduce yourself straight and then a straight question rather than a big introduction, so it'll be good. I think, yes.
Dr. Yilgovan, I have a request for the panelists. Please take a little bit of time in your busy schedule and give us a roadmap what the diaspora should be doing now to achieve our goal. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a general question, so I think they have to think and come back in later time. Yes.
Yeah, my name is Shan Sundram. I hope you remember me. I came to New York City, your office 4 years ago. I gave the painting.
Yes.
Okay, so then I met you in Geneva. At that time we talked about the referendum at that time. It was too early, but I hope there's a roadmap. We are reaching to a referendum. You gave me a big hug. It's like a warm hug the other day. Then again, Mangalavira gave me a hug too, that I didn't feel very good about his hug. So how do you think the referendum is still possible, the roadmap? Can you say about resolution, but Security Council will take this one and go to referendum. How far is possible?
So your question directly on the referendum of right to self-determination. How far is possible?
No, that's a political question. How are you going to get there? How are you going to get to the Security Council to get a resolution on that?
You are the mic.
Yeah.
So it's off? Yeah. Well, I think the constitution writing exercise in Sri Lanka that they just went through and are still going through is interesting because they did hold public consultations. That's a good measure. And I see that the Office of the High Commissioner is looking into some of the gaps there. For instance, they should have what we have in South Africa as are the various community organizations that watch over implementation, such as the National Human Rights Commission, Public Protector. Those kind of mechanisms need to go there. So I'm not sure about a referendum and self-determination. I only feel that's been a dismal struggle which has set back Sri Lanka for almost 50 years, a call for separate status. Did not get those people anywhere. However, I'm the last person to say what you should do. But my advice always is to set your goals up high, and why shouldn't you if you're entitled to?
Thank you. Avis.
Avis Srijantha, Sangam and U.S. Tamil Political Action Council. And I'm wondering from all the panelists, next March we're going to have to persuade the international community that they should continue keeping Sri Lanka on the UN Human Rights Council agenda. And from our perspective, we can come up with 2 points to raise on this. One is that human rights abuses are ongoing, and one is that there hasn't been much implementation of Resolution 31. Do you have any comments on those 2 issues, or are there any other issues that we can raise to, in our dialogue with countries, to persuade them that Sri Lanka really needs to be continued to be monitored?
So is it pointed at anyone or just generally to the panel?
Generally to the panel. Anybody who'd like to comment?
Okay, a quick response will be.
I would just respond with a couple of quick things. I think, you can argue to the Human Rights Council that the government has not done enough to meet these goals that are set out. But another, and I think that's critical, but another way to talk about it is they haven't even taken the preliminary steps to build confidence. And you could argue with the Human Rights Council that that's where they need to start. They need to say, has the government done anything to abolish the Prevention of Torture Act, which is sort of preliminary to getting to even any accountability? Have they done anything to further strengthen the witness and victim protection, so that if there needs to be witness protection, if there's going to be any accountability, and there's a lot of initial steps that the government could be taken, even if it doesn't feel it's ready today to start a tribunal. So I think sort of pushing much more strongly for some of those preliminary steps as evidence of political will would be one important opportunity.
I think that's an important question you raise. I would say there is a real risk that the matter of Sri Lanka will maybe be pushed off the table. I'm an insider, I've seen it happen. Even though it's unfinished business, states get bored and they move on. And there's also a pushback against human rights. So many threats, I agree with you, you have to strategize. So the two are very important, the points you made, that human rights violations are continuing, especially detention, the militarization, the sexual violence. I know that other states get shocked by that. The ongoing violations is important. I would remind all those who supported the resolution that the Sri Lankan government gave various undertakings and they haven't carried it out. They've lied to other states. So that would be a crucial reason why it cannot go off the radar. It has to remain on the agenda.
Okay, the next question goes to Dr. Karunian.
Yeah, very briefly, following up on this, if it is established that the Sri Lankan government has not done kept to its commitments, and if it is also established that this is intentional, and it is intentional to pull wool over the eyes, thereby actually insulting or insulting the Human Rights Council itself. And if it also is established that there has been serious crimes about which nothing is going to be done, could at that point the Human Rights Council refer this to the Security Council or the International Function of ICC? Is there a process by which the UN Human Rights Council can refer the matter to the Security Council or to the ICC?
All right, that is not going to happen. We would like to see that happen, but it won't. The Human Rights Council doesn't have the jurisdiction to refer matters to the Security Council. Only the General Assembly could do that. The Secretary General can take violations to the Security Council, but these are, Syria, huge conflicts that he does. So there's no way that is going to happen. That's why I consider it a risky situation, and therefore all efforts must be made to keep the item on the agenda of the Human Rights Council.
Okay, I'm going to there is a couple of people. Is there anyone else willing to ask questions?
Yes, one of the issues that came up in the panel, and which is so obvious to us also, is the fact that there is no political will to put accountability among the majority community in the South. And that has been a big issue that has come out very obviously from the panel also. Is it advisable for us to link our struggle for accountability with the accountability that is due to the JVP massacres that took place only a few 10 to 20 years before our massacres, the massacres that took place during the war and so on. Is it advisable to link that in order to get the political will from the South, or at the same time, on the other hand, would it just dilute our position because our struggle was totally different from the JVP, and that is something that I would like to pose to the panel.
Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think unfortunately that linkage is not necessarily available right now. has been clear over the last few years that among the community that suffered in the suppression of the JVP rebellion, they see no similarity to the atrocities suffered by the Tamil community. Despite the fact that these are highly similar violations committed by the same actors under highly similar circumstances, it has been very difficult for activists on the island to convince that victim community that they have something in common with the Tamil victim community. So I think, it is an open question whether that would be a valuable strategy. I think there's also resistance to it in the Northeast. But I think right now that wouldn't be a terribly productive strategy.
And if I could just, on the question of being strategic to Avis's question, one of the things that we work with students, young women activists at City College about is taking identity politics and connecting it to a broader political struggle, right? Finding the politics within the struggle itself. And so for me, it's being conscious of the current debates happening in the international community, right? I know for a fact right now that there's a huge amount of money going into the question of gender and violence, right? The women participating in violence, women affected by violence. There's a big conversation happening around the subject of gender and violence, right? So even where we don't address women's issues because perhaps we're limited by cultural norms and socially we have difficulty addressing gender issues, it becomes very strategic in these areas, right? Avenues that are shut down to advocacy to Sri Lanka because it's Sri Lanka and it's not relevant geopolitically are still open to the question of women's issues, right? Security Council, other ways. There are ways in the conversations that we haven't been a part of when you focus on particular issues that are relevant, issues like militarization, right? And build those alliances in terms of advocacy. I just came from Tunisia where you have this sexual violence tribunal happening that is actually a very political tribunal that is going on and that is going well, right? And those conversations are going to come up. They are going to be more relevant than Sri Lanka because of this environment. So I would say linking, the Sri Lankan advocacy along these particular lines to broader movements.
May I also comment? For any justice process to work in a transitional justice process, you have to have buy-in from the population. So I could see your concern, bringing in the South or not. Well, the OSIL reports, and many of the special rapporteurs have said there's been violations on both sides. So the Sinhalese have also suffered. So it has to be justice for all. In South Africa, it was accepted, this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'm one of those who didn't like it. We wanted prosecutions. But why did the people accept it? Yeah, because the ANC was also inquired into for violations. So just to share a little story, when I was High Commissioner, I was at this meeting with Defense Minister Gotabaya, and he said, these people, they don't accept that their sons have been killed. And he called in a Sinhalese father who was waiting outside. So they called that fellow in, now tell her what you said. And of course he said he has an only son who's disappeared. He was in the army, he's disappeared. What happened to his son? That's what he wants to know. If he's been killed, where's his body? And Gotabaya said, you see what I told you? They don't want to accept that their sons have been killed. And I said, you have to continue investigating. The father is right, he's got the right to know. So I think that's why you have to have the South understand that they have a stake in seeing impartial justice rendered.
Okay, there's 4 questions going to be posed quickly, and then with that I'm going to conclude. So that's one, first you, and after that Mr. Uddhav Kumar, Mr. Sri Skandaraja, and finally you. Okay, you have afterward there's going to be a question and answer session. So those 4, so can you start with quick question?
Yeah, so quickly, Dr. Navipillai, in your remarks you mentioned that there needs to be voice from the women in Sri Lanka, especially in Northeast, like Nimis, right? But there are a lot of limitations and constraints for them to voice their opinion. How do you think they can overcome that, or is there any process that they can voice their comments and the actual opinion in this regard?
And that's what I mean by strategy. We have to address that and see how Firstly, of course, there has to be a good system of protection of victims and witnesses, and you can do that outside by persuading governments whom you are lobbying here to invest in that. You can't even have any kind of trial if you do not protect victims. Freedom of speech is a very important principle. So you cannot suppress a person writing, like happened under the last government where journalists were killed. And this is something that the rest of the world will pick up if somebody is not being given the right to speak. I think we should encourage them. I think that we came through the worst times under apartheid. Even school children, even 8-year-olds were defended because their artwork at school somehow is hostile to the government. So if you're talking about oppression of free speech, we went through that. And you have to admire the people who nevertheless spoke up. They can word themselves so they don't risk being detained or imprisoned. You're not very useful if you are locked up in prison. We can help them on how to use the language. Yesterday I gave the example. You see that this recommendation of the High Commissioner doesn't use the language of monitor. Governments hate that language. Monitor implementation, no, it doesn't say that. It said, High Commissioner, assess implementation and update us. It's just a simple change in the language, same effect. I would really like to help people there to be able to articulate.
Let's get next, Mr. Rudra.
My name is Rudra from TGT side.
Yeah.
I have two brief observations and two questions. Dr. Pillai said about the constitution process, the constitution making is happening and there is consultation going on. But I would like to point out two things. In the 6th Amendment of the Constitution, Sri Lankan Constitution, criminalizing, we talk about free speech. Criminalize free speech on self-determination in the form of cessation. And also the Public Representation Committee that entertained proposals from people have also said that they were not going to entertain any proposals on federalism. So federalism was out. You cannot even talk about independence. So in my view, I think it's not a democratic exercise that's happening in Sri Lanka. And you also mentioned that they ratified the Convention on Enforced Disappearance. But even though they have ratified the convention, they have not enacted any domestic legislation to implement it. And also they made reservation for the individual to take the case to the committee. So in fact, it's a meaningless ratification. Anyway, my question is, you talk about briefing the Security Council, and I understand you brief the Security Council more than your predecessors. So my question is, whether can the High Commissioner, invoking any inherent power to place the matter before the Security Council, bypassing the General Assembly and HRC, or even the Secretary General, can it be tried? And the second question, for the March session, whether what we should, as an advocate, whether we should take a maximalist position, saying that we are called for a referral to the General Assembly, rather than simply ask them to keep Sri Lanka on agenda. Can we, the lobbying should be that we ask that they should be referred. Because as you said, that the issue now can be framed was Sri Lanka versus HRC. Because they promised certain things to HRC which they are not complied, and they are taking HRC to the right. So can our position, which one you would prefer as an advocate to take us for the March session? Thank you.
Well, thank you for pointing out shortcomings in that constitutional process and the ratification. Of course, you are right there. I can suggest that one route that can be tried is what they call the ARIA formula, is when the Security Council meets informally. And then they hear speakers. Sometimes they invite speakers and they hear them. And the most successful is the Commission of Inquiry into North Korea. And that happened after I had put the matter on the agenda of Human Rights Council. It had never happened before. A Commission of Inquiry, and it was chaired by Australian Judge Michael Kirby, who was so shocked by what he had found out that he wants to do much more in informing people about the Constitution. So you can see his concern. He didn't want that findings of the Constitution to fall off the table. He wanted the focus to be made. And so with the help of OHCHR, he did address the Security Council under that ARIA formula. So you may want to try that.
Can I just say one thing in terms of strategy? I think that all of us have mentioned that it's unlikely right now that the International Criminal Court or the Security Council of the UN would agree to take the Sri Lanka case and take that forward. But that doesn't mean it doesn't make sense to start laying the groundwork for that and let the Human Rights Commission and others know that there's a real concern that the government of Sri Lanka either will not or cannot do a credible accountability mechanism, and there are other alternatives that the advocacy community is going to look at. So I think you need to be sort of cautious about sort of cutting off the current avenue, but that doesn't mean you can't start laying the groundwork now for a different advocacy methodology if the Human Rights Council avenue proves fruitless.
Okay, let's just finish up these two questions. Professor Sriskan.
Mine is a very brief remark on Madam Pillai's observation on the public consultation process, something that might be of interest to the audience today. In Jaffna, there was a consultation on the new Bill of Rights for Sri Lanka. The consultation process involved 4 45-minute presentations by legal experts from Colombo and a 45-minute window allocated for an open forum, and that's one form of consultation. My view of how engagements are planned is a form of tokenism, but to be welcome, but far from what is ideal. Oh, and I might say our own Dr. Edelveer Singham is in the audience, or was in the audience, taking some of these points forward today.
Yeah, my question was related to the previous question about information provided by the civil societies for the report. This question is actually for Mr. Pillai. What measures you have to ensure the safety of the civil? So do you have any additional measures now? Now you know, I mean. That was one question. The other question was, it's just maybe just from my curiosity, where the Ban Ki-moon Secretary General, when he first went to Sri Lanka, he praised the Sri Lankan government for eliminating terrorism. Second time when he went, he said the UN failed. What was the process of changing his opinion?
Can't give you inside information. You don't think the High Commission of Human Rights is going to arrest. We had to have some action taken. That's how we ended up with the Secretary General's panel. One of the outcomes of the UN's failure, you see the Secretary General set up that panel, then a follow-up panel to examine the UN's role, and the outcome is UN failed Sri Lanka. Very important finding. And the outcome is a change of policy inside, conducted by the security, because UN security always thought, how quickly can they grab their people and take them out safely? Now the policy is how to stay and serve. A major shift as a result of the failure of Sri Lankans. And the other is that all the UN agencies cannot continue to act in their own silos like they have done for 65 years. The human rights is the concern of everybody, not just the High Commission of Human Rights. So if they see a violation, they have to report it or act on it.
Okay, thank you very much. I know there's quite a few questions going to be posted to Her Excellency, but as you know that we also had a specific session to have questions just after that. So I just want to formally conclude this session, and she will be available for another 15. So that's what I'm saying. So most of the questions are to her, right?
No, my question is for her. I have a question for Nimi. Can you hear me? So my question is about your discussion about the depoliticization of women. And so I worked for a women's NGO for a while in the States, and my understanding of a lot of kind of international NGOs that focus on women's rights is that they're very kind of peace-centric, and so they sort of frown on women who are taking up arms. So like people who are ex-combatants in the LTT or like FARC members. And so while I'm not saying that these groups think that you should go out and get a sewing machine, like how could we in the diaspora advocate, because I assume that, you know, if we're focusing on gender, it would help to have like groups with gender expertise, but to kind of advocate around that issue without forcing these like former combatants into like, you know, this beauty salon or the, you know, the sewing, the tailoring kind of situation.
And thank you. It's a really important question. What I would say is that one of the things that the last conversation we had in DC with the U.S. Institute of Peace, with Foundation, with the State Department, was about gender violence entirely with experts from around the room. Now, in this room, you had not one person I ended up asking the question who had actually met a woman who had taken up a gun. Right? So you have this research now being done on social media, being done on all these different avenues to try and understand this sort of monstrous woman who takes up a gun, right? And so part of the problem, I think, is the research, is who's doing that kind of research. You know, we had a question earlier about the voices of women and how you have to, you know, everybody says, every NGO says we want to uplift the voices of women, but that's not the issue. The issue is that it's your conversation. And it ends up being, okay, well, this is what we expect women to do. Insert Sri Lankan voice here, insert African voice here, right? We're not hearing the complexity of the conversations on the ground, right? So one of the initiatives that we're doing now at City College is to start a long-term project to allow inside-outsider research, which is to say, to take Somali American women, to take Sri Lankan American women, to take Iraqi American women and say, look, we don't need this myth of objectivity. You actually have an insight into this that can challenge and provide new ways of understanding violent extremism. And you know, I am glib about the sewing machines thing, but Kate and I are actually working on a report now. It is actually true that most feminist organizations deal with sexual violence through livelihood programs, through chicken, through cows, through soap making, through, that is a majority of how we deal with that. And that in itself becomes depoliticizing, right? So I think the people doing the research become essentially central to this, right? How do we take the lived experience of Tamil women, our understanding of culture? You know, the question I get asked all the time on these panels in DC is, well, what about the cultural elements? And what about the culture and how it represses women? And I'm tired of this question because, one, if you make culture the perpetrator, everybody else is not accountable. You don't have to do anything about it because culture's fault. Government's not accountable, military's not accountable. But two, what about all the other cultures? You're asking about this experience of being a Tamil, but what about the culture of dependency that the NGOs are creating? What about the culture of violence that militarization is doing, right? These are all cultures as well. So I think for me, the more I see young women, you know, and I know I have a student here from Yale as well, who were told, like I was told, you can't study Sri Lanka because it's not, you're not objective. We're missing out on the insights that young women can provide to change women's movements in the U.S. in a way that's going to help have effective solutions other places.
Thank you. Since there's not much time, so I'm going to end with the round. So we are not going to have a separate session. So there are a couple of more people who wanted to ask. I think that's you first. This is specifically questions to you. So that's not going to be a separate session. So that's good news.
Would have been better news if the questions were not to me.
So you painted a very pessimistic picture of international involvement with the case of Sri Lanka, especially because like it might be taken off the Human Rights Council agenda. So what avenues can we look to for international involvement outside of the UN? Because there's conflicting messages between the Secretary General and the Human Rights Council and other bodies in the UN. So without UN support, how can we get international pressure for Sri Lanka to fulfill that obligation?
Firstly, it's the other speakers on this panel were pessimistic. Yes, and I said you have to have strategy, you cannot give up, right? You cannot say you've reached the end of the road. The reality is, all you have now is that you hopped onto the Human Rights Council through the human rights route. But you need the support of all those states who supported that resolution. So as an insider, I know they often get bored, drop that issue, something new comes on. So you have to be at the governments in the countries where you are now on the outside to ensure that the reporting by the High Commissioner at least continues. That's one. Yeah, go on. I could see you jumping up to say something.
But the states are also getting conflicting reports. So some people are telling them that Sri Lanka has fulfilled, they're moving towards fulfilling their obligations, and some people are telling them that they're not. And so it's often powerful people who are telling them that they are fulfilling their obligations. So how do we, as the diaspora, manage to tell them that they're not fulfilling their obligations?
Okay, so that's a reality. You think the other side is just sitting down there quietly. They come up with their propaganda and their information. It's always happened, even in the United Nations. So NGOs, particularly you in the diaspora, that's why I salute you. You kept up and made sure that the facts come out. That's why it got onto the human rights agenda. It was a narrow margin, remember, of the votes adopting the 31st session resolution. So it's our responsibility to pick up the facts. It's wonderful that people are now going into Jaffna and finding out the facts. And the apartheid government in South Africa said black people are happy. They're different. Don't think they like black people outside. They really have to be civilized first. That's why we can't give them the vote. And that was the voice that went on. That convinced Reagan and Thatcher. So look at the forces we have against us. The ultimate answer is, of course, it's the people within the country that can force change by getting together. The Vietnam War stopped in this country because of civil society, not because the administration changed its mind. So never underestimate the power of civil society. There's been change in the whole of Middle East now because of the power of civil society. That's why I'm constantly thinking of inside Sri Lanka and how on the outside we can support them. And we need young people like you.
I think you should introduce yourself as well.
My name is Shivani. I'm going to Paul.
My name is Pawan Samalatas. My question is there any way any of these culprits could be brought to justice outside the UN structure? Like last year in Spain, the judge arrested Pinochet and brought justice. Is there any other countries would do? If so, what as the diaspora Tamils can try to help in that process?
Right, it's called universal jurisdiction. Every state has the right to exercise universal jurisdiction if a suspect is within their territory. And that's what happened with Pinochet. Now, the Magistrate Garçon is the one who went after Pinochet and others. Belgium, people of Belgium, not the government, went after the genocidaires, suspected genocidaires of Rwanda, and they had a number of trials there. Canada held trials of Rwandan genocidaires as well. So we encourage universal jurisdiction. That's the other thing we can do with our own governments. You see, this is what happened in South Africa. Al-Bashir, who's being indicted by the ICC, was right there. And so people arrest him. There's an arrest warrant against him, and the government said they can't do that. Leader to leader, they're all pals, they protect one another. So the civil society went to court, and the court ruled that President Zuma violated the laws by not arresting Al-Shabaab. So lots of activities going towards the route that if there's a serious violator on your territory, and you are against these violations, how can you tolerate this visitor in your country? In the US, they have civil cases where they get damages against a person. They attach the assets of that person. They did that with the former Yugoslav suspects. Now, the Supreme Court here has now closed that gap a bit, very unfortunately. We submitted a brief as well. I think it was to do with the oil company cases that went before. Was it? Yes. So this is the thing. Civil society always takes the initiative to push further, but we always have obstruction. We cannot give up though. We have to look for the next strategy to get around that.
Just one comment on the question of pessimism. I think it's really important to acknowledge that I think what I offer, what Kate offers, is a critique. It is not pessimistic. And I think that it is a critique that we make because we want to see action. That these critiques, which come from a very thoughtful, very considered place, are things that the United Nations should take seriously. And my fear with calling this pessimism is to say to the diaspora, look, as long as you play by the UN rules, as long as you play by advocacy rules, as long as you fit your political agendas into what the UN wants for you, into what the international community wants for you, into what Western feminists want for Tamil women, then it's okay, then you're going to see action. But you're not allowed to push back, you're not allowed to level a critique. So I would say, and I would argue against, to get rid of this word pessimism, I don't think that either Kate or myself is pessimistic, and I guarantee you, being Tamil Sri Lankan and working on Sri Lanka for 15 years requires a deep optimism that we all have.
Okay, I'm going to finish with the last question. I mean, these days in panels, you don't get posted notes. I get lots of text messages saying to complete. So that's the last one.
My name is Swarnam Shankar from Maryland. I have a question to Nemi. Pardon me if it's out of ignorance or curiosity. There were some reports about sexual violence against US and UK militaries during the Iraq War, and also sexual violence against Indian Army in Kashmir and all. How do you compare the sense of accountability or justice comparing to Sri Lanka?
Sorry, the question is the justice that those women have received?
Right.
Again, I think, as Dr. Pillai suggests, the question of sexual violence in the international community is very carefully kept within one silo, right? It's not confused with the question of political rights, right? And that's the work that we're trying to do, is to bring it together. So now if you have in Kashmir, you have a number of women who were attacked by the pellets, right? And you see these women who have been sort of attacked. The political repression always is felt differently by women, right? Because sexual violence becomes a way of asserting political dominance. So where we recognize that sexual violence is political, as the quote that we saw earlier, it is a tool for political agendas. But we don't understand the political impact it has on them, right? So the women who join the Tigers, the women who are frustrated now, the women who are radicalized, they've had these experiences and they need to be offered a political. I don't think mass sexual violence, anywhere, Kashmir, has really been reconciled, right? If you take a case like the Congo, I work very closely with the feminist Eve Ensler, who had started this program to end sexual violence in the Congo. You've had a case where the most money that has ever gone into sexual violence, millions of dollars. And there's a critique saying that none of the other issues in Congo have been addressed because all the money goes to sexual violence. And in recent research, you've seen an increase in sexual violence. Right? Now the argument there is, and I continue to believe that this is central to questions of justice, is that most of the programs, again, were candle making, were soap making, were all of these things that depoliticize the women, right? So you don't see women engaging in political conversations. What I want is for us to acknowledge that the rape had an impact on Tamil women, that they're angry. And it's not just that there's a freedom of speech problem in Sri Lanka, it's that their voices are captured in very specific gendered ways by Tamil politicians, by the Tamil community, by outside NGOs who want them to be peaceful, right? How do we as a Tamil community say, okay, if you're going to use women to be essential to depoliticizing, how do we challenge that and say we're going to create a space for women to be overtly political and have whatever politics they have, nationalist, federalist, whatever it is, right?
Thank you very much. I think it's time to conclude. I think you were not there. I was actually looking for you. So, okay, give the benefit of the doubt because he was putting his hand up.
A comment and then a compliment. I am very proud of the panel and the way they conducted the business, and I am more knowledgeable about the issues of what can be done to help the Tamil nation. My name is Patmalingam, and what I am trying to say is humanity has been at war from time immemorial. And in Sri Lanka, two names, Bandaranaike and Rajapaksa, were culprits to create the dissension between the two communities. The same happens in all parts of the world because of bad leadership. And what I am trying to say today is, in this country, in 3 days we have something happening, a major event happening, and we have one person who could be a bad leader. So I think let the panel make a comment about what they feel about.
Well, thank you for that comment. I think it's not remit of this panel. I want to summarize quickly. So it was a very good process today. We discussed on many issues. And starting with Nimi, thank you very much, Nimi being part of the panel. So she was how gender is being used to depoliticize issues. And then, Kate, thanks a lot for your contributions today, and filling up your book topic and then discussing about it. That's right, she has more sessions. Yeah, I'll actually give a general announcements of that. Heather, thank you very much for your continuous work, and I would be happy you have actually brought your expertise in here. As always, I was inspired by you when I started to actually work in the UN as an advocate, so that will continue. I think the message from Navi Pillai is always like take a maximus approach, but also try to see whether we could actually get small wins or short kind of things. And I think that was what I have actually taken.
Just wish me a good retirement.
Well, hearing from my friends in South Africa, I don't think that's going to happen because they are waiting for you to come back to take another issue after that. So that's what I'm hearing. So thank you very much. Quick announcement: there are other sessions happening after lunch. So you're all going to lunch from now. So there is a UST Pack AGM at the Renaissance Ballroom, and then the WTO meeting and the Banstrick Room Pearl meeting at 4 o'clock. And then also there is a youth forum. This is the first time there is a youth forum organized under the current president, Kuopala, where I think about 28 or 29 youths have registered to take part, and that's going to be there in a parallel session. And also they are going to have a separate session evening as well, finishing with a party or dinner and dance for them separately. I mean, it's a first of a kind, so please do send your kids, or if there is anyone, youth who are interested in to take part. There is going to be full of activities. One's going to be a topic on identity, and also a presentation on Tamil language, merit of Tamil language and Tolhapir. And also there's going to be games, activities, many more, and also a DJ coming up later. So that's from 2 o'clock onwards. And our main event starts at 6:15 or 6:30, I think. 6 o'clock, Kovalam? Is it 6 o'clock, the cocktail? At 6 o'clock. So enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much. I think the panel deserves another round of applause. Thank you very much.